When was the last time your prayer, your words to God, were similar to Elijah, as we hear in today's first reading? This is enough, O God. Enough. I've had it. We've had it. Has that been your prayer now, recently, or at any point in time? Probably. And so it's very easy to sort of understand how people can feel attracted to that scene involving Elijah under the broom tree, under some cloud. Probably because in one way or another, we've all been under the broom tree a few or more times, especially perhaps over the past 18 months of COVID's back and forth. What's going to happen? Is it going to get worse? This is enough, O Lord, Elijah complains. Take my life, please. So we can have those kind of same feelings. We can be swept under the broom tree when a job is lost and we wonder if anyone's going to hire us again, or when loved ones start dying all around. We've had 6 funerals here in church over the last week. We can find ourselves drifting into a stream of thought, not unlike the prayer of lament, which goes, enough, O God. Enough of wars and violence, enough of cancer, enough of bad politics, enough of children being kidnapped and wives abused, enough of terrorism and fear, enough hatred, enough of injustice, enough of fill in the blank. If we're exhausted to the bone by all these troubles after only living a handful of decades, Lord, how can you tolerate it for all these centuries? So it's easy to become soul weary. And so Elijah has this particularly tough vocation. He was a fire and brimstone prophet to an obstinate king and queen who were eager to slaughter anybody that challenged him. Elijah performed mighty signs in the name of God, including the heroic biblical contest that took place on Mount Carmel. Sure, he could await his food at the service of the ravens and trust in God's almighty power to win the victory, but there was a limit. There was a limit even to this man's great endurance. At last, as the story goes, hounded to the point of exhaustion by the threat of his life, Elijah sat down, and what did he do? He prayed for death. And then, like most of us, carrying a burden, heavy or too heavy to bear for too long, his grief gives way to a grateful escape. Actually, an escape that's very underrated. And it is the escape of sleep. He just lay down and fell asleep under the broom tree. God doesn't expect the impossible from us. God doesn't ask us to go beyond where our strength will take us. And so an angel arrives at the broom tree with food, with water, and the assurance of God's powerful presence. He assures Elijah that there's more to do. Not just to go on with the same way, but there's even more to do. But he doesn't just deliver that message. He also sets the table. It's not much. Piece of cake, some water, just enough. Just enough to get him through that day. And so, nourished and emboldened by this food, Elijah walks 40 days and nights more. When God sets the table, the meal is satisfying enough. Bread from heaven is more than starch and oil and yeast. It revives the soul in a way that the finest offering from your favorite bakery can't do. When the soul is willing, the body follows, and ordinary folks become absolute saints. Surprise, surprise. And so the gospel today is very much connected with this story of Elijah, and that's how the people who make up these readings and the sequence do it. It didn't occur to Elijah centuries earlier to resist, to refuse the meal that he found there, along with the implicit commission to go on, to keep on going. But the crowds around Jesus, several centuries later, vigorously resisted the preposterous claims of a living bread come down from heaven. Perhaps they weren't hungry enough, or desperate enough, or aware enough of their own need to embrace the offer. But before we rush to blame them or for their lack of gratitude or comprehension, we might remember the generations of Catholics who didn't approach the table of the Lord more than once a year or once in a lifetime, mindful of their own unworthiness, or fearful, perhaps even more so, of accepting the implicit commission that receiving the bread of life requires. And so we too might pause before we take this bread too freely. After all, it is flesh, and we become the enfleshment of Christ's body when we eat it. That's what our church, that's what our theology says. This isn't a meal to be taken lightly or unreflectively. It doesn't only nourish, but it also obliges. It obliges us to do something. So the key question always is, are we committed to the life of the world as Jesus wants, as Jesus was? And we can't answer that question too hastily or glibly. The life of the world, the last line of today's gospel, includes creation. Creation which is under siege by our consumer choices and our pursuit of wealth and privilege. Global life is profoundly influenced by both what we do and what we fail to do, as the words of the Confiteor in the beginning of the Mass often suggest. Do we foster violence or peace, hatred or compassion, the just distribution of the world's goods, or earning your keep? So if we choose to sit at the table of the Lord and share his life, which is what our presence here is all about, if we choose to do that, then we are consenting to be the body of Christ at work in the world, at the service of saving rather than condemning, and healing instead of harming. The Eucharist is medicine for the weary and for the sinners. It's not a reward for the righteous. After the meal, the Mass ends very quickly. After the meal, there is always a journey to be taken. A journey to be taken of days and miles and opportunities in the service of life. So we will be given what we need. May not be all that we want at the moment, but we will be given enough. Even as we sometimes pray, enough. We will be given what we need to take this journey, but it's up to us, as with Elijah, to start walking again.